Last night there was a 1News Kantar public poll, and again we saw Labour take a hit, this time of 2 percentage points, taking them to 35%. National remained unchanged at 39%. ACT continued its slide, dropping 1 to land at 7%, and Greens jumped 1 to 10%. No change for Te Pāti Māori. What does this mean? I am joined now by two of the superstars of New Zealand's greatest political podcast of all time, The Working Group, Martyn Bomber Bradbury and Damien Grant, the commie and the libertarian liquidator, to borrow Bomber's turn of phrase. Thank you for joining me, guys.
Pleasure to be here.
Sure.
Thank you very much. I've decided that I've stolen you both from Sean Plunket, and you're now my working group.
We're happy to be taken.
We just passed around, don't we?
Oh, I know. But don't pretend you don't enjoy it. I'll start with you, Bomber. Bomber, you're an excitable fellow, but is there anything to actually get excited about in this poll?
Look, I think it was really interesting. I was leaked the UMR internals that Labour used last night, and I put that out on the show. The Labour internals have Labour at 39 and National at 35. So from the Labour Party's perspective, they're not panicking just yet. I think it's interesting the Labour Party support is, even in the TVNZ poll, is still holding up very strong. I think it's problematic for National that Luxon seems to have peaked. I'm really surprised that ACT is on 7%, particularly when I think there are three other polls that have them in the double digits. And I'm also a little bit surprised that the Greens have not been doing as well, while Labour haven't been as effective on child poverty, housing, and all the issues that the Greens hold dear. So I still think where this all comes down to is the Māori Party have ended up as the queenmaker, and I think the issue for New Zealand politics is going to be, what does New Zealand get more scared about? Are they more scared about a national ACT government, or are they more scared about a Labour Green Māori Party government? And that's where I think the 2023 election will be decided on.
Damien, what's happened to your beloved ACT Party? The slide continues.
Yeah, that's a bit disappointing, but it's interesting, and I disagree with Martyn's analysis about which one is more scary, the Māori, Te Pāti Māori or ACT. I think it's going to come down to one of economics, and in Bill Clinton, it's the economy, stupid. Because part of the reason why I think Labour's vote is holding up and National, as Martyn says, has seemed to plateau, is that the economy continues to tick along. Yes, we have inflation, but people are also getting pay rises. I don't think I don't think the government has really been blamed for the inflation. I think they've managed to avoid responsibility for that. People seem to be blaming Adrian Orr and Vladimir Putin, and there might be some fairness in that criticism. But where the rubber's going to hit the road is we see interest rates now cranking up, and whilst the government may have avoided blame for inflation, they're not, I think, going to avoid the blame for what Adrian Orr does with interest rates. And so that's, if you look at it, if Adrian Orr does what he's meant to do and cures inflation, then the only way he can realistically cure inflation is to trigger a recession. And that's going to have a huge impact on where the politics lands in September next year. If the economy keeps going on as it is now, which it's remarkable, it's a bit of a Wile E. Coyote economy, everybody's looking at it thinking this thing should just crash, and yet it's suspended in animation and continue to go really well. So I think Labour's shot at a third term really depends on that economy continue to hum along. But if it turns sour, and I think it's very likely to, then there is absolutely nothing that is going to save Jacinda Ardern, nor there's nothing going to stop Christopher Luxon becoming Prime Minister, much to Martyn's dismay.
And your ACT Party?
Well, no, it's all about purity, Annie. This is the thing. When the party was at 17%, clearly there was a lot of people who did not know their rock card from a raisin, and so we've got rid of those people. It's like the Catholic Church. We only want the true believers, and if you're not a true believer, then we don't want. They don't want you. Not interested. You go away. I mean. What's not known is that ACT went out to all of those people on 17% and asked them who was your favourite Hayek, Frederick or Selma, and it didn't really matter what the answer was, so long as they knew an answer. I mean, if people didn't know who Selma Hayek was, well, clearly, I mean, we're not interested in their vote. How can you not know who Selma Hayek is? And if you didn't know the difference between the two, well, then the ACT Party is simply not interested in support for people who are not sufficiently ideologically pure. So
that is a spectacular excuse.
Quality votes.
That is spectacular. I'm sure that the ACT Party is thinking exactly that. Who needs those extra percentage points?
Well, I think, and the other thing is the party. The other problem, Annie, is the party has not embraced. They haven't been taking my suggestions. I've been saying, listen, we need to move. We need to move to legalise heroin. Because that will be a great winner. I think we need to move away from restrictions on child labour laws. I mean, young people need to go up chimneys because that's how they learn and that's how they become productive adults. And I think because the Labour Party hasn't embraced that, they haven't embraced the privatisation of roads, the sale of hospitals and schools, I think that's holding the party back.
Right. Well, you keep sending those letters in. I'm sure they read them very, very carefully. Something that I find utterly incomprehensible is that the Green Party is on 10%. How a minor party that on the surface seems to do very little even for their own voter base is polling so high with basically that translates to 13 seats. I don't know. Bomber, what do you put it down to?
I think they've come across this magical solution. If they just shut up and don't say anything, people forget how alienating they are and kind of just drift because they're disappointed with Labour. And so if they can just shut up from now until the 2023 election, they might be able to hold on to that 10%.
Well, hey, they might govern alone at that rate.
The real problem, I think, with the Greens is even if they do walk into the 2023 election in a position where they can leverage Labour to actually get something, the way that ACT wants to do with National, the problem is I don't think the Greens know what they would demand as a bottom line.
Yeah.
I don't think the Greens have any comprehension of how they're going to put into practice any of their policies. I mean, if they sat down with Labour and strong-armed them and said, these are the 5 things we want, I think that they would be all really technical things or really weird, woke, alienating stuff. And I just don't see, because I certainly think that Damien's absolutely right, that we are facing some very dire economic times. And if there is a sudden jump in support for the left and they're able to get into power with Māori Party, Labour and Greens, what's the policy solution going to be for crippling inflation? What are the policy solutions going to be for an unemployment rate? What will this? I fear that they've spent so much time fighting identity politics, they've got no economic plans left. So yes, maybe at 10%, but what is it they're actually going to be able to ask Labour for that they can actually implement?
It's a good point, and I mean,
I've been speaking to the people in the Green Party, and I can reveal that one of the caucus's bottom line demands before they go into coalition with Labour is that they insist that James Shaw be removed as leader. So that's the one thing that the Green Party caucus wants more than anything else. And if the Labour Party can deliver that, then the Green caucus is prepared to compromise on pretty much anything else.
They don't like to do their own dirty work in the Greens.
Oh, goodness. From what I've heard, they do a lot in the background, but... speaking...
those are a different sort of parties, Annie.
Oh, I see. Speaking of doing very little, that appears to be the winning strategy for Christopher Luxon currently. Damien, do you think that this is a strategy that can be maintained? Is it enough to sit back and hope that Labour lose the election?
Yes.
Well, that's what appears to be happening now. I certainly am not seeing too much action.
I think if you run Bomber's analysis to the Greens, it applies to National as well, right? So Chris Luxon isn't actually performing that well as a politician. So, but I think people understand he's obviously highly competent, he's obviously highly intelligent. But when he stands up to speak, he doesn't have the John Key self-depreciating, good-natured humour, insight. He doesn't warm in front of a crowd. But I don't think he so in some ways, the more he sits inside the bunker, people can project onto him whatever they want. So if you want to believe that he is a steady as she goes, John Key, Bill English type, don't rock anything and it's all safe, then you can believe Luxon is going to do that. If you believe that Luxon is going to really take to the civil servant and bring the government spending under control, then you can believe that. And for Luxon to maintain that, he needs to not say anything. So I think he should do what the Greens are doing, which, as Martyn points out, is working for them, and just not say very much.
So
talk about his background and his history and his family and how wonderful it was at Unilever in New Zealand and whatever. So
you reckon basically everyone should shut up and just let Labour self-implode?
Except Labour. I think Labour and the Maori caucus need to get out there and keep pushing co-governance. They need to keep explaining why members of the Mahuta family are so talented that they deserve all of this vast sums of money. And I think the other thing the government needs, they just need to pour more money into the spin-off, because clearly that is the secret weapon that is holding this government's popularity afloat. Is all of the work that Toby Manhire does, just keeping them afloat. That's what the spin-off is what's keeping the Labour Party afloat. The more the Labour Party talks, the more they do, the more they present themselves, the more alienating they are becoming. This co-governance stuff is toxic.
Yeah.
It is just so bad. They have completely failed to articulate why it needs to be done, and they don't appear to be backing down from that. And this is really interesting. It's starting to look like this government is held hostage by the Maori caucus. So co-governance is politically disastrous. It makes economic no sense. It makes no sense from a governance or infrastructure perspective. There is no rational reason for this government to be pushing this agenda, except that if they didn't, Willie Jackson would walk out and take 3 or 4 members with him. Because let's face it, if you have a look at that Maori caucus, a good chunk of them are not going to be around this time at the end of next year. They're going to lose. So unless you give them what they want now, what's to stop them saying, "Well, I'm going to lose my seat in September next year. I'll just smash everything now. So give me what I want right now. Give me co-governance and give me all of this other stuff. Because if you don't give it to me, I'm going to smash the party and wreck the government." And it's looking like that's where we are.
It does look like that. It looks like they have assessed the situation and gone, this is our moment to throw everything at it, because once it's over, it's going to be hard to get back into a position where we can exert this much power again. Now, New Zealand is a country that seems to be crying out for change. On the left, there's a chorus calling for the end of neoliberal politics and accusing Labour of centrism. On the right, there's a desperation for a change of government to one that's socially and fiscally conservative. And in between, there's a lot of disquiet about democracy and freedoms, etc. But we're in a situation where the opposition seems to be doing its best to become a Labour but a little bit more competent option. Will New Zealand even have the option of meaningful change at the next election, Bomber?
I think that the 2023 election is going to be the most heavily politically polarised we've seen in several generations. I think National and Labour certainly want to play that game. They want to stay very much in the centre. But because of the polarisation to the left of Labour and the polarisation to the right of National, you have the Greens and the Māori Party and ACT who want fundamental change. They want deep, deep change. And I think that people don't appreciate how far ACT really want to go. And I also think, likewise, the discussion you just had about the Māori Labour faction, it's good to see Damien learning about factions. Yes, the Labour Party Māori faction is the most powerful faction in that cabinet, has been for quite some time, and that's why Willie Jackson has been able to get billion-dollar budgets out of this government for the last 3. I mean, he's been able to get $3 billion in 3 years. That's more than the entire Waitangi Treaty Tribunal has managed in 180-odd years. So he's done very, very well. One of the reasons, of course, Labour's vote is holding up is because there is strong support within Māoridom, because they are seeing that money come out into their communities and their organisations. So that vote is going to stay solid. You haven't seen a jump in the Māori Party vote. But no, in terms of the actual policy directions, Jesus, ACT are talking about dismantling and amputating 5 entire ministries, including the Human Rights Commission.
But that's a bit useless commission, isn't it?
Well, I mean, I've gone through the Human Rights Commission when my fight was against the police. I found it very bloody useful and one of the few checks and balances on the system. So I wouldn't be throwing that out with the bath water. And I get the feeling that ACT wants to throw the entire bathroom, including the baby, including the entire house out with the bath water. So I think where ACT and where Green and Māori Party want to take politics post-2023 is further away than National and Labour are going to. And I think we have to be very honest with National. David Seymour is far smarter than Chris Luxon and will get everything he wants. I mean, the idea that Chris Luxon was like, Nicola Willis will be my finance minister, he won't have that choice unless National win an outright majority. It's the next finance minister is David Seymour. So I think both sides are going to want to pull the party that they're going to be, the tails are going to want to wag the dog. And I think that we're going to see that very much in 2023.
Question for both of you. We had the COVID election in 2020. What will the 2023 election be called? Damien, you...
Oh, yes, go for it.
Sorry.
Well, it depends on where the economy is at. But if things continue as they are now, it'll be the inflation election, I expect.
And did you say recession election there, Bomber?
Yeah, recession. It'll either be a recession or a depression. I do not think that we have understood the magnitude of the economic damage looming this year. I mean, the Reserve Bank governor was saying that we'd be looking at 4% OCR by the end of 2024. They've moved that up to 4.5%. Within 12 months. Now, I don't think we understand what adding another 2.5% onto the OCR is going to do for first-time home buyers.
Yeah, but understand this though, right? So, it's you go back 30 years ago and you raise interest rates, and let's say 2/3 of all households were exposed in some ways, and an increase in the floating mortgage rates would have sucked money out of, say, 2/3 of all households. Now I think that pain is going to be much more concentrated. So you could put my interest rates up, you could double them, and I wouldn't care because it's a relatively small part of my expenditure, right? And I think that's true for a lot of people my age and a bit younger. So in order for Adrian Orr to suck the amount of demand out of the economy, ramping up the interest rates is going to hit a relatively small number of people, and it is those people, as Mark said, the first home owners, those people who purchased houses in the last 3 years on 3%. those people are just going to be smashed on the Catherine wheel of economic misery and pain, and those people are going to be forced into insolvency and bankruptcy. Whereas the wider population, the 2/3 of homeowners, aren't going to care, because I'm on $150,000 and I'm paying $1,000 a month in interest. If I pay $2,000 a month in interest, I don't really care, because I just save a little bit less. And so that I think is what's going to happen. And so I don't know that Adrian Orr ranking up the interest rates is going to trigger the level of economic. It's going to cause a lot of pain for a small number of people. I'm not convinced it will actually trigger a recession or a depression in the way Martyn is speaking. I certainly would like it to do so, because that's how I make my living. But as a citizen of Aotearoa, but the alternative option, right? The alternative economic option is actually worse. And the alternative, so on the one hand, you've got Adrian Orr sitting there trying to suck the mind out of the economy. And he's doing that to reduce demand to help control inflation. But half of the inflation is imported inflation. It's from tradable. So the only thing he can really do there is jack up the interest rates to get more hot money coming into New Zealand, to jack up the interest, to jack up the value of the dollar. But given that all other governments around the world are doing that, he's going to need to jack it up higher than what the interest rate.
A bazooka, you say? A bazooka.
Well, to fire a bazooka, you got to have meat and 2 veg, and I think he's only got meat. But then at the same time, you've got the finance minister, who is running a fiscal stimulus counteracting what the governor of the Reserve Bank is doing. So you've got one arm of the state trying to suck demand out of the economy, and you've got the other arm of the state pouring cash into it. It's a push-you-pull-me, Dr. Dolittle disaster, and I have no idea how it's going to end. My suspicion is badly.
Yeah, I'd say not well is the answer to that. I'm not sure if you've been following our stories on Three Waters and Nanaima-Huta, but can either of you explain to me why no other media is even asking questions about this?
Well, the Daily Blog, of course, proudly went to the battlefield with the information the platform had dug up and provided an astounding and rousing defence of Nanaima-Huta and what a wonderful woman she is. And we batted away the annoying issues that you've raised. However, stepping back from my defender of the left role, it's a really bad look. Yeah. And I think, I honestly think that this is really highlighting the problem with the public interest journalism fund run by New Zealand On Air. If you look at what you have to agree to when you take the money from that fund, and all of the mainstream media have had to agree to this, it's an editorial policy, right? It's a very, very eye-opening, Jesus, those are the facts that you have to live by. This is the world view that you have to live by if you take this money. And part of that is not denigrating Māori culture to the point of asking questions like, oh, isn't this a bit dodge? And I think that what we're really seeing here is all of these news media who, one, they don't like the platform to begin with because, bloody Sean Plunket. But two, I think they're all very, very, very careful about actually commenting on this, because they could get a phone call from New Zealand On Air to say, well, this is not agreeing to the worldview that we gave you the money under. So I'm concerned that when a story like this, which has so meat on the bone in terms of, if anyone else had pulled a stunt like this, everybody would be on the story. Yeah. But because it's within Māoridom, and there is this feeling, particularly through a lot of Pākehā mainstream media, that any criticism of Māoridom equates to being racist, and that's not how they got that money. They had to agree not to be racist to get their money. I think that they're fearful over how this editorially plays out. So it's concerning for the state of journalism, but it's also concerning for the state of politics. And I don't think that the Labour Party have honestly answered this yet.
Yeah, I mean, it almost feels like we're being gaslit a little bit. Like I've seen some of the press gallery comment that there's no story there. And you just know, like you said, if it was John Key or if it was Judith Collins or any of the kind of national...
It would all be on for love and money. There would be outrage that it was this. And while I acknowledge that the minister has gone through all of the hoops that they need to in terms of stepping back and acknowledging a conflict of interest, we all acknowledge that. They've done that fine. There's still the issue of perception.
Yeah.
And I just don't think this looks good.
She's clearly
that matters.
It does matter. It matters in writing in the Cabinet Manual. It is clearly stated as a separate point. The public perception is very important.
She's his wife, right? Yeah.
Yeah. She's clearly not doing her job properly as Foreign Minister as well, and the other media is actually reporting on that. What should Jacinda Ardern be doing to sort the situation out when she returns from the States, Damien?
No, I think it's all going swimmingly. I think that Naima Houtu's failure to engage in the South Pacific is frankly great for the countries like the Solomons and Samoa and possibly Niue, because they are going to get inundated with vast amounts of Chinese cash and surveillance equipment and military bases. So if you're an average citizen in the Solomon Islands, I mean, you got a pretty rubbish government. If the Chinese come along and say we're going to build roads and we're going to put in street lighting, well, that's great, I mean, because the New Zealanders and the Australians and the Americans aren't doing that.
No, we've been caught napping.
Allow this. No, we weren't caught napping, Andy. We just don't care. We don't give a monkey's flying wrench about what happens in the Solomon Islands. The Solomon Islands can have a civil war. We don't care. Not interested. Not our problem. Right?
Until China shows up.
There can be a cholera outbreak in the Pacific, and we're not interested. We don't care. We may even accidentally make the situation worse. We just don't care. And so we weren't caught napping. We're not interested, and the Chinese are interested. And so the Chinese are coming along with a checkbook. And the Chinese are going to say, we're going to build all of your stuff and you owe us all the money. And the Solomon Islands will say, yeah, great, we'll owe you the money. But I mean, what's China going to do to collect the money? They want to build the roads and the honey area doesn't pay for it. You can't take the damn thing back. I think the whole Belt and Road initiative is flawed imperialist empire building by China that will pour large amounts of money for which they will get little or no return. And as far as the whole Naima Houtu thing, I mean, I actually wrote a column about Three Waters, and I made fun of the fact that on the name for the regulatory agency, it actually says the name was gifted by Naima Houtu, and her sister was on the head of the Maori Advisory Board for I can't remember the name of the water regulator.
Taumata Arawai, isn't it?
I mean, it was. Yeah, something like that. But anyway, I mean, the staff quite happily published that. So, I put the boot into Naima Houtu and the regulatory authority, and I made fun of Three Waters, and staff was quite happy to run it. So, it may. I'm not too sure that I quite share the. I mean, it's not a good look, and I think that if it was being done on the right, if Bill English's brother was getting similar type deals, there'd be a scandal. But I think that just reflects a wider cultural viewpoint inside the media that is reluctant to go after the left, and even more reluctant to go after Maori. I think there's a soft prejudice of low expectations, but I don't think that's linked to the Public Interest Journalism Fund. I think that's a cultural issue that has existed within the media for a decade or more.
Well, thank you for joining me, and thank you for giving your expertise and your various positions in politics from the left and right, and I'm sure
we have no expertise, Annie. What we do have,
none at all. That is a complete mystery.
What we have,
I was being kind,
is a paucity of alternative things to do, friends, any form of social engagement. Honestly, we're just lonely.
Oh,
and somebody brings us up and wants to talk to us. I mean, it's nice to have somebody to talk to during the day while we potter around our sad, broken retirement home.
Well, you're welcome anytime for a cup of tea.
Thanks, Annie.
All right, we'll catch you next time, guys.
Be well. Later, guys.
Bye. So that was Martyn, Bomber Bradbury and Damien Grant, and they were catching up a bit about the polls. It seems to me that the consensus was that the least that the other parties do, the better for them, and that Labour might just implode all on their own. And it was good to see that we had some support for our work in the Nanaia Mahuta situation from the Daily Blog and Martyn Bradbury.